A documentary film crew sets out in the dense Amazon jungle in search of a hidden tribe, but their journey becomes a trap of death. A hunter tells them about a monstrous anaconda that ruthlessly swallows its prey alive. When this ferocious creature attacks their boat, a battle for survival begins in the wild river. Will they escape from this monstrous snake, or will the anaconda make them its terrifying prey? Let's find out. The story begins with a mysterious scene. A man standing on a boat, fear evident in his eyes. He is a hunter who illegally hunts animals. An unknown shadow approaches him. Terrified, he climbs the boat's pole. But as the unknown entity gets closer, he panics and shoots himself. Meanwhile, another boat is shown, carrying 7 people heading towards the dense jungle. They want to make a documentary about the indigenous people there. Suddenly, it starts raining heavily. They see a man calling for help, saying his boat is stuck in the bushes. The crew helps him onto their boat. This man's name is Paul. They tell Paul they are going into the jungle to make a documentary film and suggest he seek help elsewhere. Paul responds that he knows some villagers in the jungle who can help repair his boat. After the rain stops, Paul shares his story. He was once a priest in a church but now captures animals for zoos and others in the dense jungle. Professor Stephen, an expert in anthropology, explains that they are here to make a documentary about the indigenous people. Paul mentions that he has met these tribes before, but finding them won't be easy. However, he offers to assist them on their journey. During the journey, they see a mysterious statue, a giant anaconda swallowing a man. Paul explains that the tribes consider this giant snake a deity, believing it protects them. To reach the tribes, they must cross a lake filled with venomous snakes. Paul also mentions that the tribes used to live here, but had to leave due to flooding. When it comes to deciding the direction, Paul suggests a route, but Professor Stephen and his team refuse to follow it, arguing that the tribes likely moved to higher ground due to the water. Paul becomes angry and declares he will leave the boat at the next stop. In the dense darkness of the night, when their boat is anchored, a couple steps out to record the mysterious sounds of the jungle. They hear rustling in the silence. Something is approaching them. Filled with fear and uncertainty, they start running. After covering some distance, they suddenly encounter Paul. Without warning, he fires his gun. The sound of the gunshot pierces the night's silence. Everyone on the boat is terrified and rushes outside. They are stunned by the sight. Paul is holding a large wild boar he shot. Seeing this, everyone breathes a sigh of relief. Paul, who had left at the previous stop, rejoins them on the boat. The next morning, as the sun's rays glisten on the river's surface, the boat moves forward. They reach an area where a pile of dry trees is scattered in the river. The boat's rope gets stuck below. Professor Stephen goes into the water to free it. As he tries to release the rope, a strange worm enters his throat through his oxygen regulator. Suddenly, he starts gasping, struggling to breathe. They quickly pull him onto the boat. When they look into his mouth, they see a horrifying worm. They manage to remove it, but Stephen still can't breathe due to the swelling in his throat. Seeing the situation worsen, Paul swiftly makes an incision in his throat and inserts a pipe. Gradually, Stephen's breathing returns. However, they now urgently need to get him to a hospital. Paul suggests they return via the route he initially proposed, as it's a shortcut. Reluctantly, everyone agrees. As they proceed on that route, they encounter a barricade made of logs. Paul has dynamite and suggests blowing up the barrier, but the others disagree, believing the barrier was placed there for a reason. Paul tries to convince them that taking another route would extend their journey by 2 more days. With no other option, they reluctantly agreed to his plan. As the dynamite explodes, the entire area shakes, the log dam collapses, and suddenly, hundreds of snakes emerge and scatter everywhere. The situation becomes terrifying. Moreover, the explosion causes the petrol tanks on the boat to fall into the water. Now they face a new problem. They have no fuel to move forward. Amidst panic, crisis, and uncertainty, their journey takes an even more dangerous turn. They continue by removing the snakes from their boat. After traveling some distance, they spot a dilapidated boat. Paul excitedly suggests they can get patrol from there. Danny and Matteo, the boat's driver, agree to go with him. Inside the boat, they find a newspaper clipping showing Paul with 2 other men who had previously captured a giant anaconda. One of them is the same person who ended his life out of unknown fear at the beginning of the story. The other man with Paul is none other than Matteo. This revelation is shocking. Matteo and Paul knew each other beforehand, and this was all part of a plan. They deliberately brought everyone to this dangerous place. There is also a massive box filled with dangerous weapons. Paul picks up the box and starts returning with Danny, while Matteo stays behind. Suddenly, a giant anaconda emerges from the darkness and attacks Matteo. It crushes him completely, snapping his bones. Matteo meets a painful death, but the rest remain unaware of this horrific incident. Danny becomes worried when Matteo doesn't return and goes to search for him. However, he only finds Matteo's torch, nothing else. When he returns to the boat, Paul shows everyone the skin of a large dead snake and claims that a similar terrifying snake must have preyed on Matteo. He also shows a wound on his face, claiming that a similar snake attacked him. Paul spreads fear, warning them that these snakes first constrict their prey, then crush their bones, causing them to die in agony. He warns everyone that they must leave as soon as possible. Now, the leader of the expedition, Terry, who came here to make a documentary, seriously considers the situation. She tells everyone that they will wait here all night, and if Matteo doesn't return, they will move forward. As night deepens and everyone falls asleep, Paul secretly makes a tempting offer to Gary. If they capture the anaconda alive, they could earn $1 million, but this task wasn't possible alone. The next morning, when Mateo is still missing, they move forward. Paul hunts a monkey and presents it as bait, claiming it will attract the anaconda. Terry, seeing this cruelty, becomes furious and firmly states that such actions won't be tolerated on her boat. But by now, greed has taken its toll. Gary has joined forces with Paul. He tells everyone that their companion is injured, and the documentary they came to make is no longer possible. Therefore, if they help Paul capture the anaconda, they can record the entire event and safely leave with Paul. By now, everyone is trapped in the dense web of the Amazon jungle, and only one person knows the way out, Paul. They use the monkey as bait in the water. In the darkness of the night, the anaconda gets caught in the trap but soon frees itself. Now it is completely enraged and storms onto their boat. As it is about to attack Terry, Paul injects it with a sedative, but it has no effect on the giant anaconda. Chaos ensues on the boat, and amidst the commotion, Denise falls into the water. Her boyfriend Gary immediately jumps in to save her. Denise somehow gets back on the boat, but just as Gary is about to climb aboard, the anaconda swiftly grabs him. Terry has a gun and is about to shoot the anaconda when Paul stops her. He says he needs it alive. If it dies, he won't get $1 million. The scene then shows the anaconda wrapping its prey tightly and diving into the water. Gary is now dead. Paul now reveals his true colors. He holds everyone at gunpoint and orders that things will now go his way on the boat. Seizing the opportunity, Terry approaches him and tries to seduce him with sweet talk. When Paul falls for her words, he is attacked from behind, rendering him unconscious. They then tie him up. The next morning, Terry finds a newspaper clipping with a picture of Paul and Mateo. This is the place where they previously captured an anaconda. She questions Paul, "You knew Mateo from before, and the route you're taking us on doesn't lead to the hospital." Paul responds, "If you all want to stay alive, you'll need my help." The boat moves forward but gets stuck in the swampy mud. To free it, everyone ties ropes to the trees and pulls the boat. Everyone gets into the water, while Denise stays on the boat. Denise, holding a knife, approaches Paul to avenge her boyfriend Gary's death. But as she is about to strike, Paul quickly traps her in his legs, kills her, and throws her body into the water. Now Paul has a knife and starts cutting his ropes. Meanwhile, Danny realizes the anaconda is approaching them. Everyone rushes to the boat to save their lives. Somehow, Danny and Terry climb aboard, but one of their companions gets stuck. He tries to climb the rocks to save himself, while the anaconda, like death, approaches them. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the boat where Paul reveals his hidden fears and intentions and suddenly attacks Danny. Terry and Danny prepare to confront Paul. Meanwhile, their companion, who is on the high rocks, suddenly sees a giant anaconda. To save his life, he quickly jumps off the rock, but before reaching the water, the anaconda catches him in midair. It ends his life by trapping him in its strong coils. However, the tree on which the anaconda is hanging also weakens and falls onto their boat. This unexpected event causes Terry and Danny to panic and jump into the water. Terry somehow manages to get back up, but Danny is still struggling in the water. Before he can climb onto the boat, the anaconda grabs him in its strong grip. Terry then pulls out her gun and fires repeatedly at it, causing the giant snake to finally die. Now, as Terry is about to pull Danny up, Paul suddenly appears and knocks her down. He snatches Terry's gun and angrily says, "You killed my $1 million snake." He is about to shoot Danny with the same gun when Professor Steven, who had the worm in his throat, injects Paul with a sedative from behind. Danny quickly strikes Paul's face with his elbow, causing him to lose balance and fall into the water. As he falls, he sees the injection has come out of his body. They then move forward and come across a dilapidated building. In need of petrol, Terry and Danny enter the building, where they find large petrol tanks. But before they can take the petrol to their boat, Paul suddenly attacks them. When they regain consciousness, they find themselves tied with ropes. Paul throws animal blood on them to attract the anaconda. According to the plan, the anaconda soon arrives. Paul cleverly traps all three in the same net and tries to sedate the anaconda with his gun, but his attempt fails. Suddenly, the anaconda breaks free from the net, becomes furious, and lunges at Paul. Paul tries to escape, but the anaconda is much faster. Within moments, it captures him in its deadly grip and eventually swallows him alive. The anaconda then chases Terry. Terry, terrified, takes refuge in a room, but the sight inside shocks her even more. The room is filled with countless small anacondas, as if it's their nest. Meanwhile, the anaconda reaches Terry again. It regurgitates Paul, whom it had swallowed earlier, as it can't chase Terry quickly after eating him. Terry immediately flees and reaches the ground, where Danny is already present. Danny tells Terry that he's going to the fireplace, and then she should explode the oil tanks below. Terry insists on going up, saying Danny is injured. She starts climbing, but the anaconda follows her. In this deadly moment, Danny attacks its tail with a spade, causing it to get stuck. Danny then drops all the oil drums and sets them on fire. Terry also jumps into the water, and the next moment, an explosion occurs in the chimney, causing the anaconda to catch fire. However, even while burning, the anaconda chases Terry. Before it can reach her, Danny pulls her up, and the burning anaconda sinks into the water. They believe it is now dead, but suddenly it resurfaces and attacks again. This time, Danny repeatedly strikes its head with an axe until it finally dies. Now, Terry, Danny, and Professor Steven move forward and finally see the indigenous people in the boat. These are the people they came to make a documentary about. Paul's words prove true. After crossing a snake-filled river, they find the tribes. They then start making their documentary, and with this, the story ends.